I'm a member of NDDOT Construction Services Division. Today I have the pleasure of introducing two great presentations. First, we'll hear Brandon Friezen of NDDOT Grand Forks District and Dustin Legacie of NDDOT Devils Lake District, and they'll be talking about their experiences using Pix4D. So please welcome Brandon and Dustin.
All right, so today we're going to talk about Pix4D and what we have used it for the NDDOT kind of over the last year. So in 2019 is kind of when we started our UAS program. We started with 17 pilots, which now we have grown to 26 pilots with 18 more scheduled to do a Part 107 boot camp, we call it. So that just shows that we are getting the initiative. We're putting more initiative into this. So we started out with 12 drones, and now I think we're up to like 15 with 4 more on the way. And then the drones are useful for photo and video documentation, that we're able to verify site conditions and keep track so you get any major rain events and then also for the project progress itself. As you can see, we got a box culvert being placed, so it's always good to fly them periodically just to you can get a good progression just to see how fast contractors are working and how progress is being made. And then we've also used for the storm flood damages, as we got a highway that was washed out on, I believe it's Highway 32 south of Petersburg. But the main object for, I guess, us kind of for survey-wise as well and to better use them is to measure, which is where our Pix4D and photogrammetry come into play. So we need the Pix4D capture app, which is what we use on our phone or tablets, depending on what we fly with. That's how we set our flight programs and what exactly we want. And then we need our drone, which typically we have Mavic 2 Zooms is kind of what we're using, and a couple Mavic 2 Pros. And then a Pix4D mapper is the software we have a license for. So the outputs we're looking for is an orthomosaic, which gives you a 2D image, which then we can get our lengths and areas for. And also we can do point clouds to get our 3D images where we can either work in Pix4D a little bit with them, or if need be, we can put them into a different drawing software, such as MicroStation or AutoCAD or TBC, Trimble Business Center. So the Pix4D capture, when we set them up on the phone, we draw our pattern on where we want to fly, get our area. And in order to, depending on if you do a odd shape like that, you can only do a single grid flight. So if you want to do a double, you'd have to set it up twice and then change your flight pattern. But to do a 3D grid, you just have to have a square, so if you just do a big area. But hopefully it keeps under a certain amount of pictures, as there is a limit in Mapper that we can process. So as I said, some of the drones we're flying, we have Mavic 2 Zooms, Mavic 2 Pros, and we have also acquired a Mavic 3 Enterprise currently that Grand Forks has, with 3 more of those on the way for the other districts that do not have drones currently, but they are getting them. So the Pix4D mapper, some of the considerations are, depending on, I guess, what you're using it for, are the cost and licensing schemes, your local versus cloud computing. So your local is going to be all based on your computer if you can process it or not, where cloud, you don't necessarily need a computer that can process it because it all goes up to separate servers that processes it all and then spits you your data. the type of UAS you're using, and then the sensor supports that your UAS has, and then also what kind of outputs you want, if you want your 3D surfaces or just getting generic areas. So the cost, like we got a perpetual license, so it was a one-time payment of, it was just under $5,000, I believe. Or you can get a monthly if you're not using it often. So this I just pulled off the internet. This is right off Pix4D's website, kind of what they require you for a computer-wise. So your Windows 10 or 11. And then the different projects, like the small projects, processing 100 images, you need 4 gigabytes of RAM. Images of 100 to 500 is 8 gigabytes of RAM. Larger projects at 500 to 1,000, you need 16 gigabytes of RAM. And then 1,000 to 2,000, you need 32 gigabyte RAM. So our laptops, this is the laptops that we use to process everything, which we have found to be sufficient so far. Is we have an HP Fury G7 mobile workstation. They are 16 gigabytes of RAM. The video processing card is more than adequate. And then some processing of the 3D maps. So I found we've done like some small, like 2 acres, with 89 images, takes about 2 hours to process on our laptops. Whereas a 33-acre gravel pit I flew, it was 975 images, so it was pushing 1,000 images. So then that took roughly 9 hours, so it was basically end of work day, process, go home. And then everything was ready come morning. So, which then there too, you have there's a lot of variables in the processing time, exactly what you want. If you're just doing if you're doing 3D maps, it's gonna take longer versus doing just your orthomosaic 2D. That's probably gonna take about half the time. And then how many number of images too, you greatly, as you can see here, 975 to 89. And then for sure what your output, exactly what you want. So I'll let Brandon take over.
So, the reason we went with Pix4D is because of just simplicity. You know, we only really needed the orthomosaics and the point clouds for volumes. Pix4D does what we need. It's very simple. Basically, you just name a job, and then you point the program to your folder of images. You know, whether it's 40 or 1,500, it loads them all up. Loads all the images, tells you that, you know, does a little QC on the images, tells you what the information it pulled out of the geotags and everything, and if it finds it all acceptable. Then just select your coordinate system, and you tell it to go with the pick your template. We just about always use 3D maps to get our orthomosaics and our 3D surfaces. We haven't used any other template. Like I said, Pix4D is pretty simple, and the template gives us everything we've needed. So you load it in here. Here you can see that on this project I did throw out targets. So the way Pix4D works to tie your photos to any other survey data you might have collected, you have to select 3 control points in 3 control points and 2 images each. And then you run the initialization. Gives you an initial process here. All the green just tells you everything processed fine, it likes it. Gives you kind of a rough point cloud below it, overview of your project. And this is kind of interesting. You can see the top 2 targets on the right were the ones I picked for initial processing. And the bottom 4 images, after you do that, it tells you what photos it thinks your control points in and the rest, and you can go through and kind of hone those in if you want. You can see they were you know, it's super zoomed in. They're probably off by a ½ inch or maybe an inch, but you can tighten all that up, select your control points in all the images. So then you just reprocess. And after that, you just tell it whether you want just the point cloud or if you want it to go all the way to the orthomosaic. You hit go, come back in the morning, and then you get to the fun part. You have your output that you can play with and get your data.
So another thing we did this last year, we ended up kind of monitoring an aggregate pit from the class 5 and aggregate that they put out of there plus the asphalt material. So with doing this, we're able to monitor the conditions from the beginning to end. We can keep an accurate record of what material has been made and what material is also being, I guess, wasted. They put it back. And then we're also ensuring that correct quantities are being paid to the landowner for royalties to help, I guess, take any arguments out at the end. So it's just beneficial for state contractor and landowner to have excellent documentation on what was actually taken out of the land. So we did 5 different flights. One was the beginning, one was the end. And then all the middle were upon request from the contractor because they were wasting piles. They needed to make room. So the flight time was approximately 48 minutes. So it was about 3 batteries on our drones. They typically last 20 to 25 minutes, so on good weather. So yep, when I first started, I created an exterior boundary, and then I was just able to duplicate that flight every time we went and fly. And then we also flew some separate piles separately as they were going to waste. That were like 1,000 yards, so we didn't need too big of a grid for that. So when we set it, we had 80% for front overlap and 70% for the side overlap. Set it for double grid, so it flew it in one direction, and then after it was done that, it switched to the second, going the other way. The speed that it took pictures at was about approximately 10 miles per hour or 14.7 feet per second. And the other thing we did was made sure to calibrate the camera, I guess, before every flight to try to get as accurate as we could. And these are just some of the numbers that we come up with that are different flights. And then on the right there, we were able to get then all the quantities that was put up in the pit and everything wasted. And we were able to get the full details of what needed to be paid out for royalties. So, and then that also helps for if there's piles that are existing from previous years, you can also keep track of that to, I guess, verify they don't change as they're not supposed to, unless they've already got proof from the landowner to use it. So these are just a couple piles that Pix4D kind of spit out to get quantities. The top one is a class 5 pile. And then that bottom small cone was one of the ones where the contractor requested us to fly because they were going to push it in the hole to make more room. It was basically a natural fines pile that they didn't need. This is the last flight we did. So we were able to break out, get quantities for every one of those little piles of what was left in the pit that didn't get used, either class 5 or asphalt material. And then here we just got some of the pictures of our flights from the different days. So we have one from like August 23rd and September 9th as they progressed with crushing. And then the 15th and the 20th of September as well. So it just kind of showed what our flight did and what we were focusing on mainly at those times, which was their big natural fines pile. They had an abundance of that, so that was what they were wasting back into the hole to make room.
So Dustin kind of went over the first thing that you do with when you get a drone is you want to measure piles, millings piles, dirt piles. After that, we looked at some other things we wanted to do. This is a bridge, 1,300-foot bridge that we wanted to chain. Doing this with a GPS or a robot or with a tape measure, where you search for delamination, record the areas. Probably take you 3.5, 4 hours, it playing in traffic. I do it with drone now. We went out there, spent about an hour chaining the bridge. Then I set up my flight over the bridge, took 10 minutes, and we're out of traffic. So just kind of a neat, when you fly with a drone, you get insane amounts of data. This is kind of a neat picture of the bridge. You can see, some of the slopes and other things. But when you get your orthomosaic, you get basically this quality of a photo over every inch of the bridge deck. You can see the ceiling. You can look at curb faces that might be rotting. You can see what we marked for delamination and how maybe it relates to some of the maintenance activities. You can see the difference between, I can tell them I had, 1,500 square yards of delamination or whatever it was. Never that high, I guess, but that doesn't tell them anything. Now they can look at the distresses and see, what I'm reporting. Overall, this is what I send to Bridge Division. It's just a orthomosaic of the job. They can see what lanes, where all the damage or all the delamination is, whether it's on one end or the other, how spread out it is. And, you give them your data. Like I said, you went from 4 hours in traffic, now you're down to an hour in traffic. Doing 2 bridges a day to 6 bridges a day when we're chaining. I had a box culvert job where I decided I was going to measure erosion control, seeding, mulching with the drone. This is about 3/4 of a mile long overall with our crossovers. Set my flight pattern over the job and put the drone up in the air. Like I said, when you survey, you only get what you shoot. When you fly a drone, you get what you want, and then you're looking later and you find all kinds of other stuff that you now have. This is just a 3D representation of the job. Just once you process it, it's just the byproduct, and it's a fun one. You can look at the slopes, you can look at everything, and you can zoom in and see. You can measure pavement marking off this, fiber rolls. I just did seeding and mulching in this case, but like I said, it's just a lot of the fun outputs that you would never get in the past, and it's just a byproduct of something else you're doing. Kind of just shows one close-up of the orthomosaic where I was kind of outlining the seeding and mulching, but you can also, anyone questions what you did for riprap? Well, you can see a very nice riprap job there, and you have this type of detail over every inch of the job. Then, of course, what I was really after for this case was the seeding and mulching. So here's my drawing where I have my areas for the seeding and mulching put into cars for a paid quantity. One thing I did last summer, we had consultant survey on a job for borrow pit. This was an 80-acre borrow pit, kind of split in half by a pipe. So there's 2 parts, an east and a west half. So I wanted to see how close I could compare to the conventional survey. So 80 acres, the left is obviously the GPS survey. It took us parts of 3 days to do this. On the right is my aerial photography. It took 3 hours, including setting control points. And on the left, I have 6,500-ish points. On the right, I have 850,000 points representing that surface. And then, of course, the final, the GPS survey on the left, they had a lot of trimming and cutting of edge lines and things to make it represent the surface well. Again, it took them several days to do the final survey, and they did it in multiple pieces. Whereas I did again, a 3-hour flight, including control, and I'm done. And you can just kind of see the difference in the outputs. I feel like the right gives you a much better idea of what's out there. The result of this, of course, was good. The consultant survey came up with almost 293,000 cubic yards of dirt, 292,800. The aerial photography, I came 300 yards difference, so within 0.1%. And it took me 6 total hours, and there's almost no editing in the office. Some of the other things that we've done, this is kind of a mixture of a bunch of things. This is in Grand Forks. Surveying intersections can be precarious. Now we just fly over it. I mean, you can see where they maybe did some as-builts for ADAs off of the photogrammetry. The green lines, they're delineating out some CPR for the next job. But it's, you know, you're not out there shooting pavement markings, shooting joints. You're not dodging traffic. I mean, the drone flew over this. It probably took 2 minutes. And just brought it into MicroStation and referenced it in, and you can do all kinds of stuff. This was so we didn't talk about Pix4D capture and the drone. This was done with the phone. This is a box culvert spall repair on Highway 2. It was a double barrel box culvert. This is one of them. The inspector just turned on his phone, walked down using the Pix4D Catch app, walked down the box culvert, turned around and walked out. Now we have a photo, we have a representation of the surface and the repair. And we were able to put it into, we used Pix4D Cloud for this. We had a trial at the time, but Pix4D Mapper would do the same thing. So now what we ended up with is we measured the area of all the floor spall repair right off that. Took 10 minutes. You can imagine how long it'd take to, wheel that, tape that, all those irregular shapes. And again, I mean, you can zoom in on that and look at every square inch, whereas if we'd have did it the other way, all you would have is a number. So that's just some of the ways we're using Pix4D to save time, keep us out of traffic, and we're finding pretty fantastic results. I think that's it.
Thanks a lot, guys. In the interest of time, I don't think we're going to do questions right now, but if you're interested in these topics, feel free to run into them and ask them more throughout the conference. As somebody who's tried to stumble around a gravel pit and a gravel pile with a GPS rod, it's easy to see how this will be safer and faster and get a lot better readings. So really interesting stuff. Thank you. Our next presentation will be Patrick Held. He'll be talking about the E-Gauge today. Patrick's an engineer with NDDOT Fargo District. Please help me welcome Patrick.
All right, thanks for the intro, David. Like he said, my name is Patrick Held. I'm a transportation engineer out of Fargo, and today my presentation will be on a new type of nuclear density gauge called the E-Gauge. You'll hear about some key features of this gauge and how it worked out on an NDDOT project I was a part of this last summer. But before I get into the new gauge, let me just provide a little background information for you. Compaction is an integral part of all kinds of construction projects. Poor compaction can result in adverse and sometimes deadly consequences. Take, for example, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. This famous landmark got its lean due to a shallow foundation that was built upon unstable soil. And even in ancient times, early Incans, Babylonians, and Romans utilized compaction when building some of the earliest roads. In the United States, the first compaction testing was developed and implemented in the 1920s in California. Ralph Proctor developed the standard Proctor compaction test in 1933, and he implemented it for the first time during the construction of the Bouquet Canyon Dam near Los Angeles. Thanks to technological advances, we now have new tools and procedures that have been developed that have greatly increased the speed and accuracy of density testing that's done today. In our toolbox that we use, we have the following methods. They're the sand cone, the rubber balloon, drive cylinder, and the nuclear method, each with their own unique way of determining density. For determining the moisture content, the methods we have available to us are the oven drying method, the direct heating method, the microwave method, the calcium carbide gas pressure method, also known as the SPEEDY, and the nuclear method. Today, the nuclear method has been widely adopted as the go-to for moisture and density testing all around the world. So what is a nuclear density gauge and how does it work? Well, the first nuclear density gauge was introduced in 1962 by William Troxler. It uses nuclear source material that releases gamma rays into the ground, and then some of those radioactive rays pass through the material you're looking to test, and it'll give you a density and a moisture content of that material. Nuclear gauges are quick and they're easy to use and are therefore widely used by state and federal agencies as well as private contractors too. When properly maintained and correctly used, these nuclear gauges pose very low health risk to the person using it and to those around them. But due to the radioactive nature of these gauges, they are heavily regulated by federal and state governments. The E-gauge was introduced in 2020 by Troxler Electronics Laboratories. It utilizes the same principles as the original nuclear gauge, but with less source material. With significantly less radiation than the standard nuclear gauge, these new gauges greatly reduce the amount of regulation and red tape that's needed to safely transport and operate the device. So what are the benefits of the new E-gauge device? For starters, it eliminates all of the above certifications, regulations, and procedures that are standard for a traditional nuclear gauge. There is a hazmat certification that is required to transport the new E-gauge, but the cost is only $50. The E-gauge also produces results that are accurate and that are comparable with the standard nuclear gauge. And it also provides those results a lot quicker than a standard sand cone or rubber balloon method. For instance, in the Fargo district, the Red River Valley has mostly fatty clays with high moisture contents. And drying down samples using the conventional microwave method can take 30 to 45 minutes to complete. Using the E-gauge, results can be determined in less than 5 minutes. Faster test results benefit both DOTs and contractors. Shorter testing times save the department on overtime costs. Less standby time allows the contractor to be more productive and saving countless man hours and equipment idle time. Some E-gauge models also have the ability to perform density tests on asphalt pavements. This benefit eliminates some of the coring requirements that would be standard for regular asphalt jobs. There are some limitations of the E-gauge. Due to the low amount of nuclear source material, the E-gauge can be very sensitive to background conditions. Things like change in temperature, changes in location, changes in material, or other sources of radiation can interfere with the E-gauge results and provide inaccuracies. The gauge does do a good job of accounting for the background accounting for those background conditions through its background scans, but it should always be in the back of your head when you're interpreting the results. Another limitation is the E-gauge is not able to directly measure the moisture content of the material being tested like a typical nuclear gauge can. To solve this problem, Troxler has included a separate moisture probe that uses an electromagnetic-based technique for measuring the moisture. This probe is inserted into the same hole that the E-gauge would go into, and the results are transmitted to the gauge through Bluetooth. The step adds a slight more time to the testing procedure, but it's very simple to do, and but it is still an extra step and an additional piece of equipment to maintain. And then the last limitation I want to mention is the correlation accuracy between the E-gauge and other accepted testing methods. A study conducted out of North Carolina's DOT has shown correlations between standard nuclear density gauges and the E-gauge to be between 1.1 pounds per cubic foot and 1.3 pounds per cubic foot. During our comparison testing with the device and the rubber balloon method, we observed correlations as close to a quarter of a pound per cubic foot, but in some instances as far off as 5 or 6 pounds per cubic foot. So what was the process of getting the E-gauge on an NDDOT project? Well, it started with a lot of back-end work by Materials and Research. From approximately 2020 to 2022, Materials and Research was conducting a study on compaction specifications for unbound material. A couple of methods were being researched, and one of those methods was the E-gauge. In 2021, I had the opportunity to work with Materials and Research on collecting some comparison data using the standard rubber balloon method and the E-gauge that Materials and Research had acquired. That research helped get the ball rolling, and in 2022, I had an opportunity to pilot the E-gauge on an NDDOT construction project. Prior to that construction season, a change order was processed to allow the use of the E-gauge for compaction testing of centerline culvert backfilling for an I-29 reconstruct project. Since this was the first time the E-gauge was to be used as acceptance on an NDDOT project, there was quite a bit of coordination between the contractors, district staff, construction services, Materials and Research, and even the Federal Highway Administration. So the pilot project that we used this on was a 13-mile reconstructive I-29 just north of Fargo. The E-gauge was used specifically for our 714 specifications, which is our culvert backfilling compaction testing. In total, we replaced 32 centerline culverts, and during the backfilling of those culverts, 258 compaction tests were taken, and a total of 80 comparison tests taken with the E-gauge and the rubber balloon. So during the construction season, my staff and myself worked with the contractor to administer compaction tests using the E-gauge. Our process that was set forth in the change order followed pretty closely to the 200A requirements in the field sampling and testing manual, which covers the standard nuclear density gauges. To start, we did 5 compaction tests using the E-gauge, and then did a comparison with the rubber balloon method. Based on those 5 tests, a correction factor was developed. This correction factor adds an adjustment to the wet density and moisture that the E-gauge gives you if it's not matching the rubber balloon method. Once that correlation factor was determined, for the next 10 tests, the E-gauge with that applied correction factor was solely used as the acceptance method for density and moisture tests that followed our standard T99 and T180 testing parameters. On the 10th test, a check-in was made with the balloon to see if the correction factor that we had developed for the E-gauge was still valid. If the balloon was within a ½ pound per cubic foot and a 0.5% on the moisture compared to the balloon, then the correction factor was determined to be valid, and we would do another 10 tests with the E-gauge and then check back in. If we failed the correlation factor, we would develop a new correlation factor by performing 5 side-by-side tests again. During our time using the E-gauge, there were 3 main concepts that really determined how well the device functioned. The first is sensitivity. I mentioned this before, but I really want to reiterate this point. The E-gauge is extremely sensitive to outside factors that can absolutely interfere with your test results. Things that seem minor, like the size of the test hole, closeness to the culvert, uneven ground, or proximity to other equipment, can alter test results. There are 2 calibration tests that are incorporated into the E-gauge that are vital to reporting accurate results. The first test is a standard count. This test is done once a day, and it calibrates the gauge to the amount of radioactive source material left in the rod. The second calibration test is a background count. This test is done to calibrate the gauge to the existing site conditions. This calibration needs to be done every time there is a change in location or change in material. For example, going from a class 3 to a clay material requires a new background count. The results of these tests should be documented and monitored for outliers that could interfere with your final test results. When we encountered results that didn't make sense, it was always good practice to try and mitigate any of the external factors that could have interfered with the test and then test again. The second concept is complexity. This piece of equipment is highly complex. Troxler did a good job training myself and my personnel on the operation of the gauge. Within a few hours of training, a technician can successfully administer a test without any assistance. Where you can run into trouble is in the event of abnormal results or faulty equipment. Due to the complexity of the device, it becomes difficult to troubleshoot problems in the field if something does go wrong. And if the equipment is faulty, then it will need to be sent back to the manufacturer for repair. The last concept is correlation. Due to this being new technology for the state of North Dakota, a tight tolerance for our correlation was established between the E-gauge and the rubber balloon method. During our side-by-side comparisons, we were never able to hit the 0.5 pound per cubic foot or the 0.5% moisture requirement. Although we were not able to hit the correlation, we felt that the gauge was accurate enough to proceed with. And as a result, we were able to collect 80 comparison tests from the E-gauge and the rubber balloon to use for future studies. So the big question is, with the sensitivity of the gauge, the complexity of the gauge, and the trouble hitting our correlation tolerances, did we save any time? And the answer is absolutely yes. We saved time. If we had taken all of our tests using the rubber balloon method, we would have spent approximately 44 hours testing on class 3 and 170 hours testing on clay. Add that all together, that's roughly 9 whole days just testing. Using the E-gauge, we can approximate those testing times down to 7 hours for class 3 and 14 hours for clay. That's a total savings of 193 hours or 8 whole days. And this showed up in the construction schedule as well. The original schedule accounted for 59 working days to complete all pipe work on the project, and it was actually completed in 45. So that's 2 weeks faster than anticipated. And as I'm sure you're all aware, in the construction business, time does equal money, so savings like this across the state could have a huge impact on overall costs, including overtime costs, bid prices, and completion times. If you're a taxpayer, a contractor, or a state agency, I see this as a big win for everyone, and I'm glad I got to be a part of the pilot program. And I think what the E-gauge showed us is that the device does work, it is beneficial, and that it will be used in the future. With that said, I'll just give a quick demonstration. One more slide. There is still a lot of work left to do before the E-gauge will become widely accepted throughout the state. Additional trial projects are being planned for use with the state's existing E-gauges, and then these additional projects will help us with future development of procedures and specifications. After that, the next step would be the development of an SP and acquisition of e-gauges for use throughout the state. And after statewide adoption, the final step would be incorporating the use of the e-gauge into the standard specifications and testing manual. And then I did bring the device, so now I will give a quick demonstration. If you've ever used a regular nuclear gauge, it works the same way. It looks the same. It's just white instead of yellow. Mostly the same buttons. The probe is in the handle. So the nuclear source material is in the handle. But you would put this out on whatever material you'd want to test. You'd run a background count that would acclimate the device to the existing site conditions, which takes anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. Then you would insert your rod to the desired depth. It goes anywhere from backscatter, which would be for testing asphalt, all the way down to, I believe, 12 inches of depth if you want to test that. Then it'll take its readings, which takes approximately 2 minutes. It'll give you some results on here, and then it'll ask you to insert the moisture probe. So this connects to the device through Bluetooth, and this is what's used to test the moisture on there. So you can insert it, it'll give you a live reading on here, you accept the results, and then it'll show you your wet density and your moisture, and then if you have your Proctor information plugged in, it'll give you your dry density too. And so all in all, start to finish, it takes about 5 minutes. And that's all I got, David.
Really nice presentation, Patrick. I was a little nervous when you said you were going to do a demonstration because I'm familiar with the rubber balloon and the Speedy, and we don't have time for that. So yeah, really interesting stuff. Thank you. I think we have 4 minutes if anybody has a short question, and if not, feel free to meet up with anybody. Does anybody have a short question, like an easy yes or no answer? I think in the interest of time, yeah, meet up with these guys as you see them throughout the conference. Next on the agenda is a 20-minute networking break in Hall B, and that'll be followed in Hall A by the Vision Zero presentation at 4:20. So thank you again to the speakers. Thanks for attending, and enjoy the rest of the conference.